Hello and welcome. Today I'm joined by Pete Shea, a strategic technology leader who has spent over 2 decades turning ambitious business visions into reality. Pete has a unique gift for bridging the gap between boardroom strategy and actual executable product roadmaps. He's one of these rare guys that's equally comfortable presenting to C-suite folks as he is mentoring the kids coming up in our industry. He currently serves as chief strategic solver at Solvative, and I will get that right if it kills me. It's an awesome, cool title where he leads an innovative team that tackles complex business challenges through modern digital solutions, whether it's commerce platforms, IoT, AI implementations, whatever. Pete and his guys have built a really robust reputation in the industry on a very simple philosophy. Every problem has a solution, as he and I found getting our audio to work prior to recording, and they will find it as we did. But his experience runs much deeper than just his current role. His career is like a masterclass in digital transformation, man after my own heart. From his early days implementing CRM systems and leading global product teams at Fortune 500s to helping companies navigate very, very complicated intersections of strategy, tech, and CX. Again, one of these rare guys that gets the full picture and understands not just what tech can do, but how it should actually serve real business outcomes where there's real human beings on the other side. He was architected lots of enterprise level solutions while never losing sight of the customer journey, which ultimately makes it all worthwhile. Pete, welcome. Would you like to tell the ladies and gentlemen a bit more about yourself and what you're working on these days?
Thank you, Tim. First off, I wish I had you as a wingman when I was single.
I'm better at this. Trust me. You don't want me doing that.
A very flattering picture. I hope I live up to some portion of that. Yeah, I mean, you and I have been doing this a real long time. So I'm really excited to be here with you today. And, I think it really speaks to some of the things that stay the same, that we have kind of been in this technology world for the better part of 25, 30 years, and yet getting sound to work was a significant issue.
I mean, two grown-ups, we've been doing this for a long time, right? Getting the speaker to work, it was touch and go.
Yeah. It's the little things.
You and I had a conversation 2 weeks ago, something you had, and I just want to open with this because it was one of these things that, and I think you probably do too, but I have kind of a high bar for, a lot of just techno babble and just white papers and stuff. You hit me with something as it regards to Gen AI. We were talking about where's all this going in terms of guardrails, governance, and stuff like that. And, you have this more simply and elegantly than anybody I've spoken with. And I've spoken with a lot of people, a lot of dinners, a lot of events, and all this stuff. You have some really interesting thoughts on how to very simply put some governance thoughts together and also some just big guardrails. I wondered if you could just talk to that.
Yeah, and one man's opinion, as always. I state that before. I guess one of the benefits of being old and being in this space for so long is that we've sort of, lived through a lot of the transformative, pieces of it. I remember, sending out my nightly packets over the internet when I would close down the New Balance factory store, right? And so, you have sort of various stages of maturity. Back in the days, of the original internet, I think we had a lot of organic growth. It was very, very people-led because there were no playbooks. Most of the early, adopters were like IRC board moderators and users and that kind of thing. And so, you had sort of this organic built-in nodality and this really, really organic, human governance model because it was just really, really a simple tool for communicating. Then we get into, sort of Web 1.0 and that becomes, some marketing and yada, yada, yada. And it goes on and it goes on. And now we have this sort of AI thing, which is, at least in terms of, sales and marketing, proliferating at an insane rate, and I think, and you and I talked about this. If you talk to people in the AI world, and I've got, as you said, I've got a whole team of developers that have sort of been testing this out. This is not a ready for prime time solution. It does some things very well, mostly related to sort of what I would call hard data and repeatable, tasks and that sort of thing, more insulated sort of framing. But it's not intelligent. It doesn't string together, expanded concepts into real strategic or environmental landscapes. And it doesn't decision, in a way that humans decision, quite frankly. And part of that, is that it's new. And part of that is that, we have access to so many invisible data sets and, microstimuli that it doesn't have, and we don't even know that we have most of the time. So, there's a sort of a fundamental gap there. But I think, a couple things. So you were talking about the government side. On the governance side, how do we, as, I want to say owners of the technology, right? The shepherds of the technology.
Yeah, probably.
How do we teach it to be good,
Yeah.
for lack of a better term?
And this goes back to the old Google do no evil, right? Like you're kind of,
Right.
is that how you're thinking of this?
Yeah, and it's funny because I was actually talking, about this idea to the boys the other day, and I was like, I wonder if I just asked it right now. So one of the things, I went to Holy Cross, and it's a Jesuit institution, but we studied all the religions because, the Jesuits or
League,
whatever you
right?
want to call them. What's that?
Your Patriot League, Holy Cross.
Patriot League, that's right. But one of the things that you learn is sort of like, whatever jacket you want to put on the thing, right? Most of the core fundamentals are the same. Whatever you want to call them, the 10 Commandments or the decrees or the laws or whatever it is, right? And so I literally just used the AI and I was like, hey, give me a morality structure, like a list of concepts that are consistent among most of the religions and cultures in the world. And it took about, obviously, a half a second, and it came back with them, right? Like if we boil sort of the thinking and the language down to its simplest concepts, it could be something that would serve as a common compass for us to imbue AI with, that humans could understand and that the AI could understand. And then the feedback loop would sort of have this as a pillar. And so just in terms of like teaching it to be good, there isn't really any way for us to give it, a good mom and dad. It's too broadly distributed. The best thing that you can do is sort of say, here are the, just like you do if you send your kid to Sunday school or et cetera, you teach them the concepts. They have real world experiences. The adult in the room says, you did that right. You didn't do that right. That's not so great. They screw up. They learn from hard knocks, all the rest of that. But like, there's always some structure in place that essentially says, please don't do that. Don't do that again. If you do something bad again, we're going to do something to you.
And that goes
So
back
I think
time
like,
immemorial.
Right. Yeah, exactly right. And so I think that
Cavemen were basically saying, don't steal from the next caveman. Like that's kind of,
yeah, exactly.
and these are just universal truths.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, obviously the irony is that like this thing is learned on information that now the people are like, what, how did you get, I didn't tell you could use this, but we are where we are. You know what I mean? And so I do think it's not going away. I think we both agree on that, right? I don't think that its morality should be exclusively profit motive. And I don't know, right? I don't know who's going to stand up and say, I think I can make money and agree with that. I would like to think, that there's some guys out there, the Perplexity guys seem like nice guys, but it's difficult, right? So, how do you figure out how to teach something that you want to be able to give decision-making power to use that decision-making power in a fashion that has your best long-term interests in mind. And so part of it is morality.
Yeah.
And I think, that's obvious. And that's an idea that I had. I don't know that it's a solution, but it's something. The other part of it is like, is it good? And you and I talked about this like a little bit. So what happens, does AI take all of our jobs? Right? Does AI wreck the economy? Does AI simply funnel money up to a handful of, billionaires, et cetera, et cetera? And there's certainly a road there. Right? I think it would be naive to think that there's not a road there. But I think also because of, over adoption, perhaps, what I'm seeing is people being very ready to put more trust in this thing than it's necessarily ready for.
Yes.
And I think this is going to create, and you and I talked about this, a little bit of a fix-it economy, a little bit of a scavenger economy down the road. And the example that
It's
I used with you
consistent
was
though,
white.
right? So what you're saying is though, because look, we're early in the curve, right? We're first inning, top of the first inning, and you've
Yep.
seen all these sort of hype cycles, right? You get this. Somebody said this to me a long time ago at a conference, and I would love to credit him, but I forget who it was. But a guy had this term irrational exuberance in boardrooms. That when this new
Yeah.
technology comes out, you get this groundswell of irrational exuberance by the board, the PE, whoever it is, and they think they get as soon as they've read 4 white papers on it and they saw it on their favorite news feed of choice, they're ready to put the entire company's stuff into this thing. And A,
Yeah.
it's not a good idea. B, like it's not ready for that yet. And so I think what you're saying is we're seeing the exact same thing on sort of like a hype curve here.
Yeah. But on steroids.
Yes.
Yeah. And part of it is, I'm gonna leak some of my, maybe old man cynicism in here a little bit, but I think part of it is part of the macro, right? And, you know, one of the things that you'll notice is that the people that are pushing for hyper fast adoption of this thing, when I say people, I mean, corporate entities, are people that can absolutely weather a couple of waves of negative impact from this thing. So if I'm Amazon, you know what I mean? And I know for a fact that I'm both good at technology and diversified enough that if I push, one of my competitors in, let's say, the logistics space or the retailing space or the marketplace space or whatever it is, into buying too deeply into AI and they get hurt by it, how does that harm me?
Yeah. That's a brilliant point.
So, in some cases, there's maybe some gamesmanship here where, I know, but I don't care. But that being said, I think, in terms of jobs, they're going to change. There's a path here where you got to know AI. And I think there is going to be I wouldn't be surprised to have a Y2K moment, right?
Yeah, talk
Where
about you.
there's an
You
entire
went down
economy,
this road with me. I
sort
said
of,
I got the grew light bulb over my head when you said that. I said it's going to happen. Some version of this is going to play out.
right. Yeah. You're like, God, I let it go too far. I took my hand off the wheel. I was looking at what the end of the year was going to look like, and I let a bunch of people go, and I didn't replace them, and maybe I got shot. And this thing was down in the basement, you know, digging and digging and digging and digging and digging, and nobody was paying any attention to it. And now, now I'm sitting on this, right? So I got to unwind it. I got to fix it. I got to figure out, how not to do it again, et cetera, et cetera. And that's going to be an industry, in the same way that, 50 years ago, there wasn't necessarily an industry for tornado cleanup, but there sure as hell is now. And that's, sort of like the nature of change where, you have to be able to adapt, and people that move fast and get it and are willing to dig in
And so I
will
think
be
what you're
okay.
saying is that look, and you talk to some of these futurology people, and I'll tell you, if you ever want to get yourself, very depressed, 4 o'clock in the morning, watch YouTube and these futurologists. I mean, like, it's
Yeah.
guys, it's not. We're going to make it. I'm pretty sure we're all going to figure this out together.
Yeah.
But it's what they're saying is yes, and I agree with them. There's absolutely going to be short-term disruption in the labor market. 1,000,000% that's going to happen. But I think what these guys never really pick up on is what you just said, is you're going to have people that are going to have to go build picks and shovels to clean up whatever initial messes are going to happen. It's inevitable. Every one of these sea changes in technology, and to your point, this is obviously on steroids, but it's going to create, some sort of, knock on secondary, tertiary cottage industries as a result of that. I just absolutely, and that's not going to be short term, but I think mid and long term, you're going to see careers like, look, what you and I didn't exist 50 years ago. Not really. I mean, it really didn't. And I think, somewhere in the Bible, Moses was saying, oh, kids today, everything's, disaster. Every subsequent generation has figured it out, and it looks radically different today than it did a long time ago. But what you'll eventually, I agree with you, you're going to see these industries crop up here and there.
Yeah, for sure. Just to persist that metaphor, right? You're also going to see a vulture economy.
Yes.
right? So when a town gets wiped out by, tornadoes, some people come in and they make a little money off fixing things up, but there's another group that comes in and buys everybody out and owns the town, and that will also happen here, to sort of the earlier point, which is that if you have means, you're going to be looking at undervalued software and companies and that kind of thing who are sitting on a problem. And you might see some fundamental value there in terms of product or human capital or whatever it might be. And if you've got the means, you're going to come up and you're going to take those. So, like most things in our world anyway, here, the rich will get richer. I don't think that there's any way to say that that's not going to happen. But that doesn't necessarily mean that all opportunity is gone.
Yeah, I
It just
think,
changes.
what it opens the door. Yeah, look, again, this is one of these age-old things, rich get richer. Like it's
Right.
kind of a universal truth. But what I think this will absolutely do is open up a ton of doors. And for like really bright, industrious people that can get out of their own way and, the world's ending. There's people out there that figure things out. They figure out how to go serve a need. They find the need and they go bring to market some sort of really cool solution that no one's really thought to do before. And in a lot of cases, you're going to build it on the back of the very thing that it's disrupted, right? Like you'll have people that take, generative AI and create some really, really cool stuff to solve needs that industry is creating. It's a really fascinating sort of thing.
I'm telling you right now, while we're all sitting here trying to figure out, how to do better B2B marketing funnels with AI, somebody's out there applying this to Porta Johns, and they're going to be the rich one.
It will, by the way. No, you're 100% right. Like these arcane industries that like no one thinks of that will get completely upended by this. It's crazy. You mentioned Porter Johns, sort of omni-channel. I mean, they're everywhere. I wonder if we could switch gears for a moment and talk about you got buzzword bingo with all things omni-channel. You have lived through you and Solvative probably more than most companies I've seen. Lived through a lot of the hype cycle based on real implementations that you all have done with real major retail brands. Talk, if you would, for a minute on what actually gets results. I mean, yes, a lot of these brands will get a really beautiful PowerPoint from folks that are friends at Bain, McKinsey, BCG, whatever. And that's a great starting point. But I think what you and Salvative have done over the years, you've done a fantastic job of saying, okay, this is the theoretical stuff. And now here's how we can go make this very operational and impactful to an actual business.
Yeah, I mean, well, like everything with omnichannel, there's, so much of it. It's almost like a cloud of things. And I know we'll talk about this in a couple different ways later, but like, when you're trying to sell people things, there are like really three things that, you have to care about, right? One is product. Good product is good marketing, as they say, right? And so if you make a good product, something, that people need and want, it doesn't really matter as long as they can get it. The second, right, is the customer, right? And knowing, who they are and what they want. And that's, for 10 years, well, for 20 years, we've been saying that. For 10 years, we've been talking about customer data, and getting that right is a real problem because how do I learn, what I should do? Where are they? What do they want? And then the third thing, obviously, is just the experience itself. When they come to the site, is it presented in a way that they want? Can they find what they want easily? If I want them to go to a store, where is the store? Is the store experience good? Do people care? That kind of thing. And those are all, sort of components of a good brand, But, when we talk about omnichannel and, I've worked with a bunch of retailers and had a bunch of brands and that kind of thing. We don't even use that term consistently everywhere. For
Yeah,
me,
and it does. It means something completely different. And from day one of that word, I've been, do I like it? Do I not? But like, it's what people seem to use because it means something different to everybody. Like for somebody, it's
yeah,
fulfillment, micro center fulfillment. Another person, it means upper funnel media, and that has an impact on retail. So yeah, no, it means something different to everybody.
yeah. So I grew up meaning that, I've got a brand and I've got a website and I've got a mobile site and maybe a mobile app and I've got a store and maybe an outlet. I might consider even outlet different from store. And that's sort of like own branded omni channel. Nowadays, I think what you're seeing is that it's, sort of like where you are plus where your marketplace is. And that's omnichannel. And so Amazon is part of omnichannel. You know what I mean? Walmart is part of omnichannel. eBay marketplace is omnichannel. And then, I guess if we just eliminate all of our past history and bias, we would simply say wherever the customer meets my brand is a channel, and that's omnichannel. And what does that mean? So in China, right, you're talking about WeChat. We don't really have that concept here necessarily yet, although it's something that people are trying to figure out, shopping on Instagram and that kind of thing. So really, if you go back to my earlier statement, the only thing that really works is to start with your customer and what they need, to build a product that fits that need, to have a real message that connects with people and care enough to deliver it in a way that is actually attempting to connect with people, and then simply to be there when they want to buy something. And that's very, unique in a lot of different ways based on what it is that you're selling. I spent a couple of hellish years in insurance, and the model there is just be there all the time because you never know when they're going to think about it, right? It's contextual, right?
Yeah.
The marketplace.
Do you, in your journey, and God knows I've hit this wall, and you've got to find creative ways sort of around, over, under, through, where you have delivered on a silver platter to whoever your brand sponsor is, on the retail side, on the brand side, whatever, and you say, this is who your customer, I know you think, or you want to think, this is who your customer is, a 25-year-old, whatever, but your real customer is like 73 and whatever, it's a whole different demographic and all that. And guess what, they don't shop at these cool stores that you shop in, no matter how much you want them to. They don't. They're buying their stuff at Costco on the weekends, and like, this is where the fish are actually biting, despite what you think. No matter how much sometimes CMOs and brand people want some of these things to be true, they just aren't. And like, and God knows I've had to come up with very, very creative solutions on how to sort of like ease some of these folks into that. I'm curious, I mean, have you ever come across any like such issues?
Oh man, I mean, it's a little bit of a Pandora's box there, I guess, right? So, yeah. um, so there are a couple big icebergs in there, right? So the first big iceberg is simply the customer data itself. So let's say organizationally, politically, creatively, product marketing wise, everybody's aligned and they want to trust the analytics and they want to do real segmentation and they want to build out personas and they want to understand what, a real customer journey looks like and what good experiences look like. We wouldn't have spent the last 20 years talking about what a CDP is and why it has 19 flavors if that were easy to do. So, you're starting to see some like maturity there, but there's some real holes there. And I'll tell you, like, to your Costco point, one of the biggest holes is, I don't know what happens when they go to Costco, right? Costco's not sending me back something that says so-and-so came into the store today and bought your product necessarily. All I probably see is run. So there are some real gaps in that from a data perspective, even assuming you have all the data and it's hygienic and you've got people that know how to manipulate it.
Big
to show what
assumption
you
about
want
it.
and you can read it more. Yeah. it's tough. The second thing is who owns it and who is going to mandate. Let's say that I have all that stuff somewhere, right? Maybe the CMO has it, or maybe analytics has it, or maybe merchandising has it, or maybe media has it. And they say, I've got a real good view on our customer and I use data to get there and here's what they look like, right? And this is a real world example. The people that bought paid media for a company that I've worked for had a completely different segmentation list than the people that sent email and SMS.
Not uncommon,
And
by
they
the
had
way.
a completely,
Totally not
right?
uncommon. Shockingly not uncommon.
Right. And then you get down into store merchandising and they've got, different types of people, which makes a little bit of sense also, right? But there is no like center of excellence necessarily for the customer in most places. And you have seen like people take a wave at this, like, oh, I've got a CCO or I've got a CXO or whatever it is. But I've never seen them really have the kind of juice that you would need to, you know, to really make this happen in a large organization. And that's largely political, right? If I've spent 20 years there getting, working my way up to CMO or CDO or COO or whatever the, heck it is, why am I suddenly going to kneel down for this new person, you know, whose role they just like invented, So that requires a lot of interpersonal skills, and it requires, a big hat standing behind you and all those things. And that's hard too, So, I mean, I think there isn't really a magic bullet, but the real things are you have to have a shared belief in what you want to mean to your customers, right? You have to understand who your customer is, and you've got to really focus on them. This is so long ago, I'll actually, like just said, when I worked for Rockport like 15 years ago, and I was, just rolling out their digital. And Rockport, we're obviously of an age where we remember them as like a real premier brand.
It was.
Rockport shoes, right?
Sure.
Yeah, so if
that was the
your dad
Rolls
wore
Royce
Rockport,
in that category. That was it.
exactly right. And even when we worked there, like, the young people would be like, oh, my dad wears those. It was a
Yeah.
real niche thing. And they, in
Yeah.
my mind, had achieved the absolute peak of any business, which is that without doing a thing, their customer would come back and buy the same shoes again.
Exact same shoe, by the way.
Exact same shoe, no marketing, nothing,
Amazing.
right? All you have to do is be open, and they're going to come back and they're going to buy this
It's like
shoe.
pizza,
This is the
by the way.
pinnacle
You make good pizza.
of brand building.
You don't have to
Yeah.
innovate. It's just by the way, don't
Yeah.
innovate because it's perfect. It's perfect as it is.
Yeah.
Don't do anything to it.
Exactly right. They were, for whatever reason, obsessed with putting Rockport on women's feet.
What's an untapped
You know?
market? We're losing. I'm sure somebody told them you're losing half the market.
Yeah. And it was like, this was the goal of all, to end all goals, right? The sales guys are like, what are we doing? The product people are like, what are we doing? The marketing people are like, yay, this is so much more fun than photo shoots with old dudes, so just not aligned. But there was not organizational alignment in the why, right? The brand itself didn't necessarily want to go there. It was square peggy.
Yeah.
So you couldn't really like, shape it that way. And the customer just didn't get it. The stretch was too far. And so, I think like sometimes you just have to be able to, especially now, I would say, look at what you're good at with your customer base and your product set and say, how can I make that experience better instead of just growth? Crocs is a good example of somebody who tried to make all shoes to everybody, figured out it wasn't a good idea, narrowed it back down. Birkenstocks, right? That famous interview where the guy says, I'm in this business for margin, not growth, right? We learned our lesson. I'm not going to spend a bunch of money chasing markets that aren't there for us and not be profitable. I'll wait. We always come back around. And so I think that, especially now, is really the wisdom. Don't try to define the channels because you want the channels. Define the channels because the customer wants the product and is in those channels. If you figure out there's an opportunity for growth because for whatever reason, somebody on TikTok went viral with your product and that was a new area for you, then by all means, use your execution capabilities to go and grab that business. But don't make it up because you want to impress somebody on Wall Street.
Basically, category extensions. If you're San Pellegrino, you're not going to go into the radial tire business tomorrow. You might want to go into the flavored beverage business, which they've done successfully. But I'm not so sure if I want to put tires on my car. They're made by a water company. It sounds like that's kind of, and that might be what. But by the way, you get some of these. I talked about this similar concept with somebody else recently. You have companies that are completely not in these categories, and they go and get these brilliant ideas to do this very disruptive thing. Like they're a food company, and all of a sudden they want to go make perfume. Like, okay, you're going to get 5 minutes worth of press on that. You're going to make a lot of noise with it. But I often wonder when you have like a fast food company decides to go, they're going to make underwear, fragrance, they're going to do all this, whatever. And yeah, they get a little buzz out of it. I just wonder if they had spent that kind of energy and resources and whatever, focusing on their core business, how much better off would they be? And I understand the temptations of doing that in a public company, and they feel the need to make a lot of noise. It's funny, and it leads me to another thing I want to get into with you is operational excellence, right? You probably remember, and we're Knicks fans, so I mean, Michael Jordan, he's the greatest, but it's painful still. The first time he shot a foul shot with his eyes closed, it was against the Denver Nuggets. And at the end of the game, the Bulls won. If I'm remembering this well, the Bulls won by like 8 points or something. By happy accident, Denver had missed like 8 free throws. So Chicago, with Jordan shooting with his eyes closed, was perfect on free throws. The most unsexy, whatever thing in sports is free throws, right? The most boring thing. But the team, including the Jordan one with his eyes closed, they were flawless. They wind up winning the game by like 8 points. Denver missed 8 free throws. So the point is that, like, had Denver been like just operationally excellent, perfect, whatever you want to call it, they would have at least tied the game and lived to fight another day. And it leads me to what I know that you and Solvative are really, really into, which is just like operationally being really tight. And it's one of these things where, it's never going to get you headlined. It's never going to probably make a board deck or whatever, but like it wins you championships, and it makes your month and quarter and so on. I'm just curious your thoughts on that.
Well, my first thought is that the free throw isn't boring when you need two to win and your guy misses the first one.
That's true, by the way.
But it's definitely not sexy then either. Yeah, I mean, like genius is what, 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration. It's not really just the sweat though, is it? Right. You still have to kind of do a good job. And that's, you and I have talked about this, you know what I mean? Like I've been on the brand side a bunch. I've been on the, whatever you want to call it, consulting and SI side a bunch. And it's sort of one of these things where you're kind of in a bad relationship, but it feels like a lot of effort to get to a good one or move to a new one. And so you just sort of like accept each other's, sort of flaws, I guess, what codependency or whatever it might be. But it's like stressful, you're just sort of like accepting that this is the only way, I need to be, without crisis, what would I have? That sort of thing. And it always frustrated me, honestly, because you can look at a thing and you can say, like, this isn't that hard. We could simply do better, but for whatever reason, you find that that's harder than you think. The larger the organization gets, the harder it is to sort of like do. And so I've known these guys for a decade or so, and they always, had two qualities that really impressed me. The first was they're honest, and, we've all been in situations where, well, contractually, here's kind of where we are, but if you were a stand-up, person, we wouldn't do that. And they've always done the stand-up thing. They're just good partners. They want the people that they work with and that they know, to have good things, for lack of a better term, right? I said I was going to do that. I'm going to do it. I said it was going to cost that much. It's going to cost that much. I said it was going to work. It's going to work. You ran into a little trouble. I'm here for you. The second thing is they won't hire anyone or do anything unless there is excellence implicit in the direction. And so, for me, that's a low stress environment. I say, can you do this thing? They say, yes. They go, they do it. It comes back, pretty much works. We fine tune it a little bit, do a little QA, UAT, blah, 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 boom, it works. And that's nice. So I go talk to people and I say, you need something? Tell me what it is. We'll figure it out. If it's custom, we'll figure it out. We'll build it. It'll work. And that's nice. That's sort of like, a stress-free thing. Now, we're a company of 150 people. So I don't want to sit here, and tell somebody that's managing, 3 divisions, of an international enterprise with a large IT department and 3 global SIs and all the rest of it, that it's that easy, because, obviously it's not that easy.
It's tough stuff. This is tough stuff, by the way. The technology stuff, but people stuff, that's a whole separate thing. I mean, that's a whole different discipline. You have to sort of, manage expectations and personalities and moods and this and that. It's not simple.
No, it's really, really hard. And then, you know, on top of it, the broader the mechanism is, the easier it is to simply point fingers. Why would I make the effort to change this when I can simply blame someone else for it? And that's the hardest thing, I think, for like that you see with like leadership now. And I've talked about this, I think, a lot, is that at the very, very top, we see a lot of managing up, right? The board, the street, I got to present these things for them, blah, 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 blah. It has to look like this, et cetera, right? And these are your organizational leaders, but the things that they're managing aren't necessarily organizational, right? Who is managing the doers? Who is aligning strategy to work, right? Who is making sure that where we have cross-functional efforts, everybody's rowing in the right direction? And then you sort of get to the next level and you've got just sort of a hodgepodge of types of people. You might have people that have been there forever and are absolutely bona fide experts in one little area, but maybe aren't necessarily as modernized to look at, enterprise digital types of things.
So how do you get
You might
those
have-
guys outside? Because you have to, right? You call it whatever you want, coach them up, what have you. You got to push them, especially today. And it was always true, but especially that you got to push
Yep.
them outside the comfort zone. And I'm 1,000,000% in. Look, if Frank wants to solve a problem differently than Mary wants to solve a problem, and both get, great results. So what do you need from me, right? Like, as a leader, what do you need from me? I'm going to get you both what you need, but all 100% on that. But like, how do you, one wants to sort of be pushed and some don't. What do you do there? I mean, because you gotta
Yeah.
move them forward. Otherwise, you're gonna be outside looking in before you know it.
Well, that's the thing, is that you like, you got to get in the middle. You got to get them in a room, right? You got to figure out, like, what's the commonality here? Sometimes it's just, look, this is the plan and here's your part in the plan. I don't need you two to be connected at the hip by any stretch of the imagination, but just understand that this is where we're going, and we can't do it without you, and you got to do it. So we can set it up for you to do it separately. We can set it up for you to do it together, one way or the other. You got to like work more often than not, sit down, do a little relationship building or something like that. It like works out. But, what's the thing here is that means that you as a leader had to spend time managing down, not up, right? And it's harder because it's one-on-one time, it's interpersonal time, it's follow-up time. And the scope of that, is small. This is a 2-person scope of effort, for leadership. And so what has a tendency to sort of happen is that is a thing that's sort of outsourced to a project manager somewhere who may not even be in the time zone, who's attempting to like make these things work. And now it's simply not going to happen. Right. Right. There's no history there. There may not even be in the building. There's no authority. So it sort of like falls apart. So, sort of to talk about the way that we do it is that like everything is a team, so if you need a pod of 4 or 5 people, right, that's your pod. They're on your Slack. They're on your teams. They're part of your team. They're available to you. And, my expectation is that their job is to help you do your job. My job is to be able to have the time to step in and make sure that teams work as teams, but like ultimately it doesn't really go, perfectly for any organization really ever. But at minimum, if you don't have a definition of done when you start,
Yeah.
how
By the
would
way,
you
isn't
know?
that the most important thing? Like, what is like when we finish? What will be true
Yeah.
when we finish? Will the
Exactly.
color be green? Will 1 + 1 = 2? Like, what will be true when we're done? Like, isn't that just the most important thing? You in your seat might be very surprised, maybe not. How many, M shops, agencies, whatever, that I've seen come and go over the years, They do not start out an engagement like that. It's just this nebulous, vast thing
Yeah.
where it sounds like I mean, okay, you want us to deliver XYZ deliverables. Okay. You're working backwards from these, if I want to deliver this, these 10 things have to be true. And they're going to be in this phasing and this cadence and this and that. It sounds like you're basically pushing back down into your organization. All right, this team is responsible for this team is responsible for this, et cetera, et cetera. And you very, very clear swim lanes, customer facing, and then also definitely internally.
Everybody's customer. So, I mean, that's like everybody in our team is full stack. I probably told you this, right?
Yeah.
So,
I love that, by the way. That's
and this is
very
one of the
cool.
things that makes it so easy for me, obviously, is I don't have to pull a team together of 10% of an architect and 15% of a front-end designer, 20% of a front-end developer, and 10% of a data management engineer, and so on and so forth. Somebody that knows Commerce Cloud and blah, 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 right? Because that's just a nightmare. The calendar alone makes that a nightmare, right? Much less real-time availability. Now I got somebody on the front end that's gatekeeping,
Yeah.
communication and resourcing and all the rest of that. And so that makes the relationship hard. What we've sort of like done in those instances is we've recreated all the organizational and political problems of the client's organization. Pretty much the reason that they probably came to us is because we're not supposed to have that in our model as an outsourcer, right? So that's not, I just don't like it. I mean, in all honesty, I'm supposed to be able to solve your problems.
It's in
So
your
when
title,
I
by the
talk
way.
to
You're one
you,
of the coolest job titles I've ever seen. You are
thank
the
you.
chief. What
I
is your
can't take
title?
any credit for that.
Chief. What is your title?
Chief strategic solver. We're all solvers.
Love it.
You got a problem, we try to solve it. But that's, when there's a definition of done, that definition should marry to some problem statement or some objective, right? I don't want to build you a thing. You don't want me to build you a thing because you like things. You
But
want
it
me to build
happens.
you something
Like
because you
it
got a
really, really
problem.
happens. You lead me to one of my other points here. And I know we're a little tight on time. I often think, and I preach, I really, really preach future proofing a business to make it scalable, applicatable, simple, and you have to future proof things. You can't come up with these Rube Goldberg type solutions that, you know, some guy in a corner has all up in here. No, it's got to be basic, well documented, and then scalable. You're talking like an awful lot about people. And you're really saying one of the most important things to future proof a business. And I think you can complicate these businesses so much, but I believe that you can also simplify them. And I'm a simple guy. I'm a very simple cat. At the end of the day, I mean, you know what? If you're doing more than like three, four things, I don't know how you're doing. Like I can't do it. I mean, and by the way, somebody walks into my office and they don't have a pencil and paper. I tell them all the time, you must be a lot smarter than me because like I don't know how. I don't remember, how many cups of coffee I had today, let alone you're going to talk about this subject matter and you're just going to remember it? You got to be kidding me.
They're like,
So
I worked at Chili's.
what's that?
They're like, I worked at Chili's.
Fantastic. But that's good for you.
Yeah.
But I think you might agree, and I'm just curious your thoughts. Probably one of the most important elements of future proofing a solution that you're going to hand off to a client or just a business in general probably comes down to the people and how you sort of ways of working and who does what when.
Yeah. Well, and this kind of touches back on the AI, but like, honestly, most of the software that we work with is built by humans to be used by humans, right? I mean, even an API, which is just moving data around, you know what I mean? It was built by somebody to be read and maintained by somebody else, right? And that's why we have, iPaaS solutions, because it needs to scale. And, at the end of the day, one person is working for a group of people that are requesting a thing, right? I've got a problem. I think technology can solve it. And I want you to help me build it, right? And so what we ask is, what's the problem? What are the components of the problem today? What does it do well? What does it do poorly? What does it not do? So then we define what it's going to need to do. And then we say, who's going to use it? Right? And who's going to maintain it? Right? And what does that need to look like? You know? And then finally, the question I always asked you, to, probably your first point is, what else might you want this to do down the road? Because I don't want to build that now, and I don't need to build that now, but I have to build the thing that I'm building so it does not make it harder to build that thing, right? That's sort of the do no harm thing.
By the way, you're probably in a
Scalability
class
has to
of
be built
maybe one
early.
of two or three folks in your role I've ever even heard ask that question, and it's shocking. Look, it's so easy to build a thing, and you know perfectly well. You probably know better than the client does. Yeah, I'm going to build it, but in 6 months they're going to have this need, this problem, this headache, whatever, and you're going to. A lot of folks in your seat, they're silent because they know they'll come back, and then they'll buy another whatever round of consulting and this and that, and then go from scratch. But like, you're basically saying you're leaving all kinds of windows ajar and doors open to say, okay, I'm going to architect this knowing that, by the way, you have a well defined point of view on this industry. And you've done this so many times before that if a car is coming down the street, don't cross, right? Like, that. You didn't need to be told, hey, there's a car coming. Maybe I should wait. But like, so many folks in the industry, I've seen this, and it's brutal. And they'll go to a big enterprise, and then they'll just get fleeced. And they get away with it. But you're approaching it very, very thoughtfully and respectfully, and basically saying, I know that if you want a front end, a redo of a front end. Great, fantastic. I'm going to do that. But I don't put words in your mouth, but you're saying, you know what? You may very, very well need a new OMS, a new WMS, a new whole set of APIs to support all this stuff. You're leaving the nodes to go where you could just go plug right into that stuff.
Yeah. And, when you talk about sort of whatever you want to call it, just the technology to simplify it a little bit, especially now, these are such hyper connected infrastructures. A lot of people like to use the term composable, and then a lot of people don't like the term composable, but I'm like, well, I mean, it's just composable by nature. You got pieces, the pieces are connected to each other, right? In any ecosystem where things are connected, it's really, really hard not to touch one thing and expect that it's not going to change anything else, right? And so the question that I always ask, and I don't make anyone do anything because I can't, quite frankly, though, is to say, if you want to change this thing without creating additional problems, you should probably change this thing first. That is the nature of your flow, whether it's process or data or whatever it is. Right. And so, let's look at that. If you don't want to do that, then what I will do is present to you the lowest footprint solution for the one thing that you're attempting to change, and then, maybe that thing will generate additional revenues or save you some money, and we can self-fund some of the more fundamental changes that you need or whatever. And that's, just part of doing business. Like, I might only have this much budget right now, and I've got a low-hanging fruit and I want to do it. And I know that that's there. But if I didn't say anything about that, and the thing that we built did harm, I'm sort of on the hook for this now, right? Lying by omission. That's not a good way to build relationships. It's not a way that I like to do business. I'd rather be the Rockport of SIs. Let me put it to you that way. I don't want growing just to grow, right, is not. I don't believe that it's sustainable for the way that we want to do things. For our brand, I'm never going to write down, this year I have 150 developers and next year I want to have 300 developers. What the hell is that? Who cares, right? Like, what I want to be able to do is to persist this vision that we have to make a good place for myself and my employees to work. And I want, to go out in the marketplace. And when I see people that we've done work for, I want to be able to, smile at them and have them smile at me and say, it's good to see you. And if they need help, then, we're here. So I think that that's like the most real important thing. And, sometimes you don't know what you don't know. And that's the nature of life. But we have questions that we can ask, right? We all know that, to try to sort of get there. And hopefully you do. And if you miss one, you say, my bad. Let's turn this thing over and look at it from another angle.
It
But I
happens.
think, and I don't want to paint a broad brush here. There's a ton of people in this industry, that are good about raising their hand, and a lot, and just like everybody else, sometimes the answer is like, good point, but nah. And that's a problem that maybe you just don't have the muscle to solve from where you're sitting. But you should always raise your hand, right?
Well, look, I really, really appreciate, spending some time together, Pete. It was a pleasure. Check out Pete Shea, check out Solvative. They're awesome. Worked with them, for a little bit over the years. They're fantastic folks to do business with, great partners. Any closing thoughts?
At first, let me say thanks for having me join you today, Tim. This is a lot of fun. Hopefully I didn't talk too much and tank your ratings, but yeah. I mean, it's exciting times, right?
But isn't it
There's a
though?
there's a
Like
lot of
you like I know you actually believe that. There's people out there that are like the sky's falling, and you know what? I get it. I do understand that point of view. I really do. I mean, I have kids that are about to be entering the workforce in the not too distant future. And it's a little whatever. I mean, it's not obvious that it's going to be a very linear path for them. But I just believe, I think as you do, the doors that are about to be thrown open are going to be, I think, way bigger, like orders of magnitude bigger than the ones that are closing. And I think that's just a historical thing. You're a historian, like you more than most people in this industry I speak to. Like you are very much a historian, and there's always been doors that close and new doors that open. It's life, right? It's the circle of life, whatever. But I
yeah.
think the ones that are about to open are just things that like no one's thought of. And your point about Y2K is like, yeah, I think there's going to be quite a need for a lot of solutions out there.
Yeah, and I could be completely wrong, and it might be all Windows from here. I have like no idea, but I guess like there are certainly days that I look at it and I'm like, this guy is absolutely falling. But like the upside of that stance is that at the end you get to say, "I told you it would fall." I mean, that's not really the lottery,
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
so you should probably go the other route.
It's a good idea. I think you should. I think most people should.
It's like, well, I can sit here and doom and gloom, and then at the end, I guess I get to say I was right, or I can say, why don't I look and see what this means? Let me see if I can adapt. Maybe I can learn. Win.
All right, my friend.
Tim, good talking to you.
Always a pleasure.